Hello, hello, hello. This is Reverend Derek Terry, and welcome to the Intersection ONA Podcast. I am your host, Rev Derek Terry, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube at Rev Derek Terry. I'm also the program director for the Open and Affirming Coalition. Thank you so much for listening to or watching this latest episode. Just a couple of church announcements before we get into the meat of today's pod. One, our national gathering is coming up in September, and you are invited. This is our very first in-person national gathering since 2019. It's taking place in Cincinnati, Ohio, at the Summit Hotel, September 18th through the 22nd. Registration is now open. Visit openaffirming.org to register. Early bird registration expires on July 17th and it's $300. We're also offering an installment plan where you can pay a $100 deposit and pay the additional $200 in monthly installments leading up to the national gathering to help people to offset those costs. You do not want to miss this opportunity. We're super excited. We're going to have some inspiring keynote speakers and talk about the state of the movement. There's also a lot of really cool workshop topics that we are working on relating to policy and advocacy. We're really encouraging each ONA church to send at least 2 representatives, but you don't have to be a leader in the church to want to come and be a part of this. So openaffirming.org for more information. We would love to see you there. Also, we're wrapping up Pride Month. Please, we're encouraging every church to send in your sustaining donations to the coalition. As most of you know, 100% of our operating costs we raise directly. We do not receive any funds from the denomination. So if every ONA church would just help us out in each Pride Month, that would really help us to provide you with the services that we have. You can visit openaffirming.org to give online or get our information where you can mail in your checks, not just to churches, but individuals. We appreciate your help as well. Thank you for everyone who contributed to our Give Out Day campaign. We raised just over $5,000, which was a huge blessing for our work. Lastly, before we get into the conversation today with Pastor James, please email me at ona.openaffirming.org to let me know what your church did for Pride Month. We would love to see pictures and videos or anything that you have that we can share with our churches on our social media. So once again, whatever you have going on at your church, not just in Pride Month, but anytime, let us know at openaffirming.org. We would love to share what's going on in your church with others. So without further ado, we're going to get into a conversation that I have with Marge Erin Johnson, also known as Pastor James, at theology.queen on Instagram, a UCC pastor who is a leader in the drag church movement. Our conversation was absolutely amazing. We talk a little bit about their story. We talk about their ministry and drag church and what that means, church revitalization, revival, and so much more. They are an amazing theologian doing some really good work. And so you definitely want to jump into this conversation. If you are listening to this pod, check out the video on our Spotify account or our YouTube so that you can see Marge Erin Johnson in full drag, looking fabulous and beautiful. Our very first interview with someone in drag. So let us know what you think. Please like, share, comment, and rate however you listen to this podcast. Take care. God bless. Let's go. Welcome to the Intersection ONA Podcast. This is your host, Reverend Derek Terry at Rev Derek Terry on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. And I am super excited to be here with Marge Erin Johnson. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am awesome. You look fabulous. As soon as I saw her on the screen, I was like, "Oh man, let me fix my beard or something. Let me try." So, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for being here. We are celebrating Pride Month, and you're our special Pride Month guest.
Yay, happy Pride.
Happy Pride. So, tell us a little bit about who Marge Erin Johnson is.
Yeah. Um, well, I am a drag queen and I'm also a pastor of a church, out of drag as James, which is my alter ego. And yeah, I do this really wonderful and life-giving and liberating thing called drag church, where I show up to church as my fabulous self, and everyone is invited to come as their fabulous selves, and to wear their flashiest and most fabulous outfits. And yeah.
Love that.
Mhm.
Love that. So where are you? Where do you hail from? What was life like for
Mhm.
you before? I don't know who came first, James or Marge, or who will like exactly right. So what was life like before you found your footing in drag church and in pastoring and all that type of thing?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Connecticut and I grew up in a UCC church. Lifelong UCCer. I was baptized at a month old.
Mm,
Um, and for a while, I studied anthropology. And then I rediscovered the call to ministry that I had when I was a teenager. So I went off to Union Theological Seminary.
ooh, love Union.
Yeah. Um, and let's see what else. Yeah, I started doing drag while I was in seminary. It was COVID times, pandemic times, lockdown times. Not to say that we're not still in COVID times, because we are.
Right.
But in those times when everyone was like sitting alone by themselves in their home or their apartment, I was in my friend's studio apartment. She had left, and I made my way in there. And I'm a non-binary person, and so I really wanted to take some time to be like, okay, like what's the story with makeup for me? And I had this moment where like I wasn't seeing anyone. Like 2 weeks had gone by, and like I did not see another human being in person.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it was a good time for me to experiment with makeup and to be like, does this feel good for me? Is this a sort of gender expression that I want to lean into? And then, I had been watching RuPaul's Drag Race since season 3 was live. And I was like, I think it's time. I had always like, once I saw that, I was like, oh, I want to do drag someday. But it's like so intimidating to get started because like no one wants to look busted, and it's kind of like a rite of passage when you do drag for the first time. You kind of look a little messy, but it's part of the process.
Let's say it's part of the process. I feel like that when I look at old sermons that I've preached, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, ugh.
Yeah, for sure. It is kind of like that. Yeah, or yeah.
And so
Um,
growing up,
yeah.
I
Go ahead. Sorry.
was going to say, so growing up in UCC Church, did you and coming to identify as non-binary, did you feel the church? Did you feel supported in that? Did you feel like, I don't know, yeah, I know you said Connecticut.
Mhm.
Were you in an ONA church, or were they pretty affirming, or how was that your
No,
upbringing?
they were not open and affirming. You know, and that's very unfortunate because there were a lot of queer and trans youth um, who I knew when I was, a teenager, and I saw so many queer and trans kids like grow up in the church and just leave, right?
Mm,
Um, and it kind of had me wondering, like, okay, what is God up to? Like, is God planting like all of these queer kids here to like change the church? And I had
mm,
believed that for a while, and I don't believe that anymore.
Mhm.
But I had led the open and affirming process, and I went off to seminary, and the process was derailed. So I am no longer in contact with that church, and neither is my family.
Wow.
Yeah.
How so you when did you first realize, when did you know, I may not be straight, or I may not be, whatever that looks like for you?
Like forever. I don't know. I don't think I had like a moment where I was like, oh, like that's it.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And if I did, I don't remember it. It's just kind of like I think my experience is pretty similar to other queer people, where it's just
Mhm.
like you feel different. There's kind of like you are different, um, and yeah. So that's kind of how I remember it.
Yeah.
Um, but as far as having like an epiphany, nah, not really.
So just kind of like it was always there, and it's really dope that you tried to help your church become open and affirming, and then leaving it makes sense that if they're not there, and we always say the churches get there when they get there. Our goal is 100% ONA, and the congregation I serve, it took almost 30 years from
Oh,
when
wow.
it was first a conversation, and then they called a gay pastor, and it still took us several years before we formalized the process, and now we're probably one of the most progressive churches in the city. So yeah, it happens how it happens.
Hmm.
How did you find um how did you find your voice in your ministry, in all of those things? So growing up in the church, and then finding seminary, and there's all those like that negativity that we can find that can keep us from being who we really are. How did you find God in all of that?
Hmm. Well, I have the privilege of being able to say that I've always had a good relationship with God, and not every queer person can say that. And yeah, it's I, I don't know. It wasn't really a struggle for me. Like I
Good.
had always known that I was created the way that I was supposed to be, and if the Bible said this, or if like some pastor says this, like y'all are the one with the problem, not me. You know. So yeah. I mean, that's pretty much it.
I love that. I love that. And I always ask people, because everyone has different journeys and different stories, right? And
Mhm.
so I love when people are like, my family, my church, everyone was supportive. So I don't have that, I don't have that struggle. Or, it's really good so that people can find themselves when they listen to the pod, when they watch the videos, find themselves in the story. I love that you discovered drag in the quarantine of the early days of the
Mhm.
pandemic. And so you said you were thinking about that beforehand. What finally gave you the confidence to just try? Like, and how did you try? Like, I know a lot of people work with a drag queen who's already doing it to kind of help along the way. But if you're by yourself in your friend's studio, like, how did you start?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of great resources out there on YouTube with like queens teaching how to do makeup, how to do hair, how to sew. So I had, gone down the rabbit hole and found a lot of information. Actually, I had this one wig. I don't have it anymore. But I had this like $150 Amazon wig that I was like really big on. Like, oh, I want to, I didn't, because I I didn't want to look bad.
Mhm.
Um, and I think RuPaul's Drag Race has something to do with that, right? In the way that it has like set drag to this particular standard.
Absolutely.
Um, and so I was like, well, I got to be good at hair, and especially because I'm like 6'2" out of heels. I'm also like a larger person, that I would have to have like big hair. Like I'm not someone who could wear a flat wig and it would look good on me.
Right, right, right.
Um, And so I had this poor wig. I mean, it has really been through it. It was garbage by the end, you know. But I learned how to like curl the wig, style the wig, how to use a steamer on the wig to make the hair straight. I mean, it was a huge process too. It would take me like a whole day to style one wig. And I'm sure if I practiced and like kept up with it, it wouldn't take that long anymore. But yeah, it was definitely like a trial and error process. And a lot of it is documented on my Instagram, which is at theology.queen, if you want to scroll back and see how horrible I looked. Or, you know, the story, the progress, if you will, right? So
I love that. I discovered art during the pandemic. I was always kind of artsy, but I was like, I was looking for something to occupy my mind that I thought would not be expensive. I was like, I just want to sketch, which is like a pencil and a piece of paper. But just like you, when you fall down the rabbit hole of drag, you realize it's way more expensive and way more time than you thought. I realized it's not just one pencil, it's 20. And then it's not just one type of paper. It's like all this different paper. And then you want to try this and this and this. And then I got a whole a whole thing. But I love discovering when people find stuff. How did you fuse, I don't know, for lack of a better word, or combine or marry or your theology training and what you were learning and developing your drag persona? Like, how did they come together?
Well, I mean, the blueprint was already there. Because First Church Somerville had been doing drag gospel for 10 years before I started doing drag. And Molly Finney Basket had written about it in her book, A Real Good Church. So, I mean, I was also very interested in church revitalization and always kind of thought that I would be a pastor someday who hired some drag artists to come in for Pride Month or something. And here I am, I am the drag queen. Surprise. But yeah, Union is also it tends to be social justice and liberation theology based.
It's the home of James Cone for years and years and years, right? So yeah, Kelly Brown Douglas, yeah, all those amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I did not have the privilege of learning from either of them, but yeah, definitely the spirit of that
exactly
is there. And I think drag church is this way that blends worship and art and liberation theology and queer liberation in this way that creates a new sort of experience that is life-giving and healing for people.
So can you explain what drag church is? Like how that came about for you and what that looks like, and is it Sunday morning? Is it 11? What is drag church?
Yeah, it is Sunday morning. It doesn't have to be, but I prefer it to be on Sunday morning. And while I was working at Fort Washington Collegiate Church, we got a grant through the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship to queer our worship services.
Was it one of those worship renewal grants?
Yeah, it was one of those. It was the $15,000 grant.
Yeah, that is awesome. Drag for worship renewal. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but as soon as I heard that, I'm putting the information out there. So you hear that, churches? Worship renewal grant, Calvin Institute. Yeah,
it's a great grant.
Absolutely.
Definitely something that you want to take advantage of, whoever is listening. But in writing the grant application, we had found, the staff had found, that there's a tendency in church to push queerness up to the side.
Yep.
To be okay, well, that's great that you're here, you're included, you're affirmed sometimes, and then we have this great group that meets on Wednesday night, and it's a different experience to center queerness in worship, because to me, worship is the heart and soul of a community, a church community. And if we can't queer worship, then we can't queer the church.
Mm.
And so drag church is this, it's an extravagant and like kind of radical way of doing it, because you're not leaving much left. You know? Yeah.
So you're in drag. Are there other people in drag at church, or how like people on the program, the sermon, like what does all of that look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are a number of people who do this. Like, I'm not the only drag queen
Right.
or drag artist.
Right.
For me, I don't do this every Sunday. This is
Right.
like a special occasion type of thing. Lost my train of thought. It's not an everyday thing. I don't show up every day in drag.
Right.
And wait, can you repeat your question? I'm so sorry.
Just like, what does it look like at actual drag service?
Oh,
like,
yeah. So, I mean, the way that I do it, I lean more into preaching, because I think looking at the reason why people come to church or come to church on Sunday is to hear the sermon. I think there's data to support that.
Right.
And who has the mic is also very important.
Right.
So you could be, let's see. So like Flamey Grant is like probably well-known like Christian drag queen.
Right.
As far as I know, I don't think she preaches. She's a singer, and she expresses her story through song. And that's great. That's great. And I think there are limitations to, and this is like not to hate on her because she's lovely.
No.
But I think there are limitations to putting drag artists in the entertainment box. Do you know what I mean? To say that you are not, you can't give a word on Sunday.
Yeah.
You can sing, you can do a lip sync, you can do a song. And that's just not the reality. We have something to say about God.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And so, after graduating seminary, and when you've graduated, this is part of your ministry, right? The drag is part of your ministry. When it comes to answering a call to a church, finding a call to a church, how was that journey for you? Even though I understand, like, the UCC is supposed to be pretty progressive, did you face any difficulties looking for a call with this being a part of your ministry?
Absolutely. And, I didn't want it to be something that I hid and was like, oh, this is me later. Like, after you have hired me, by the way, I'm also a drag queen. I really wanted to be upfront and honest. And, whether I went to a church where, I did it or I didn't do it, the minimum for a congregation to call me was that they had to be okay with me doing it somewhere else. That's the minimum, right? And so when I made my profile, and I just did that for the first time over the summer, and I've been called to a church, but when I made my profile, I was strategic in putting the information about drag in where it has that question, describe an experience that's meaningful to you in ministry.
Right.
And so I put it in there to show how meaningful this is to me and how meaningful it is to other people as well. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And did I have challenges? Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, and I do want to be very thankful to the coalition, because there was an experience with one of the churches that I had applied to that I had a very bad experience. And I thank the coalition for stepping in and for supporting and for giving that support and for offering to meet with that committee and to teach them how they can do better. And that was important to me too. I didn't want to say like, oh, like, let's go punish this church. I really was hoping for something more transformative and restorative, right? And so yeah, as far as like applying, I literally just typed in like, because you can search the
Yeah.
church and you could put in like LGBTQ or like open and affirming. And I didn't apply to any church that didn't list open and affirming in their description. Even if they were open and affirming, if it wasn't as important to list it in
Exactly.
your little paragraph, that's not the place for me.
Right.
That's not the place for me. So I applied to pretty much every open and affirming church that I could find on the list. And I was actually called to 2 different churches. And one other church that I think really wanted me, but I don't think that would have worked out. So I went into it kind of like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I'm just going to trust God on this one because
Absolutely.
I know that I've been called to ministry since I was like 14 years old. I also know that drag is a spiritual calling as well. And so I'm not going to give up now, kind of like, oh, am I going to get a job or not?
Right.
I got a job, and I got a good one too. I got a good church.
Yes.
Which is the Church of Christ Congregational in Millis, Massachusetts, by the way. So yeah.
That is super. It's super cool. I asked that question. I like making people uncomfortable sometimes because,
yeah,
and not you. I mean, the people listening, because discomfort is like those are like the growth edges. And I think sometimes churches, the Open and Affirming Coalition has been around since 1972, so that's 52 years. And I think some churches have made that commitment at a time where, it's been 15, 20, 30 years, and we've made the commitment. They have the rainbow flags, they have the things, but they may not have a lot of out queer people in their spaces, or they may not be on the front lines standing with queer people in some of the things that are happening. And so it's really easy to think you're more affirming than you are. And so I constantly ask queer pastors or people who are looking for churches, are you having any trouble because of your queerness or because of how you walk? And so when I see you in drag and doing something called drag church, I was like, I know. And then when you say the coalition standing with you, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that's who you were like until that moment. Because there's things that happen, which is why we exist, and which is why we do advocate for and help people, hopefully help people to rise to the level of affirmation, not acceptance, but affirmation that they claim they want. How do you think something like drag church or anything else you may think about could be used to help some of our churches when we talk about revitalizing ministry, revitalizing churches? When you brought that up, I was like, ooh, what do you think about that? What do you think about revival in church and the future of not only the denomination but the Christian church as it is?
Well, how do I want to answer this? My brain just went in like 50 different places. I think I want to start off by saying that Christianity has always been queer.
Yep.
And so, I mean,
God, can we put that on a t-shirt? Like, I will give you credit. That is, I'm literally writing it down. I'm sorry.
Go for it. I have it on a sticker. I think mine says the church has always been queer,
but that's true too. Yeah.
Community. Yeah, I understand Jesus as someone who like moved through this world or like his society in a queer way, in a way that challenged authority, in a way that dissolved binaries, right? And also disrupted the category of life and death. And like not just Jesus, but also early Christians. There's a book that came out recently called After Jesus, Before Christianity. And there are, I think, 1 or 2 chapters just applying queer theory to the ways in which people reacted to the ministry and the life of Jesus in those first few hundred years. And what they have found is that gender roles were more fluid and flexible in this way that people had been practicing a type of, I think they called it gender pluralism. And to me, hearing that, I mean, that's so affirming of like the stuff that I'm doing. Like, you know, like there's this 2,000-year-old legacy of like gender fluidity going on. And so I think it makes a lot of sense in terms of like going back to like the original teachings of Jesus. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like the church in a lot of ways has lost its way. And, you know, we don't have to get into that, but sorry, were you going to say something?
No. I was just and so as in revitalizing, it's so interesting because I think a lot of people think of something, you know, revitalization as something that is like novel, but it sounds like how you started responding was getting back to something that was always the part of the church, but that we may have shifted away from.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, to go even before that, I think there's a really great interpretation of Joseph and the coat of many colors, right?
Exactly.
You know, the coat of many colors, the Ketone Passim as this like princess robe.
Yes.
Right. And the way that these, how do I want to characterize Joseph? The femininity of Joseph was, you know, it wasn't I mean, I guess you could interpret it the way that the brothers had responded to that was, you know, I think parallel to transphobic violence, right? Especially in the way that they not only, you know, attack him, they also destroy the coat.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yep.
And so yeah, I think there's this fantastic legacy of, you know, gender and like not being confined to the categories of man and woman in our tradition. And that's something to celebrate, I think.
And have you seen that as you do drag church, as you pastor, as you walk in your ministry, have you seen people get it? Like people click or how what does that look like? What does that feel like to you?
Yes, so definitely. I'll talk about an experience I had at a Unitarian Universalist church in Stratford, Connecticut. Fantastic church, great people. And part of their worship service is to have a discussion portion like built into the worship. So I was invited to come give a sermon, and there was a discussion around how the church wanted to advertise the event because they were concerned about outside people coming in, disrupting the service, you know, hate criming the church or whatever. And I said, I totally get that. I totally get that. And if you don't advertise it, you miss out on reaching the people who need it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Also, like, people come up to me sometimes after, like, in tears. Tears, joyful tears, not, like, horrified tears, of course, but... and that's been interesting. Really interesting to see, like, how moving it is for people, you know? And I think people think of drag and they're like, oh, it's just like a reverent, like nonsensical thing. And like, but like, I mean, it can be, but it doesn't have to be. And it could be more, I mean, it could be very spiritually moving for people and very healing for people, especially those who have been affected by the rules of church, you know? So it's not just queer people too. I mean,
right.
The person that I'm thinking of who came up to me and cried at that church service was a straight white woman. And like, the church has also like historically been awful to women too.
Yep.
And I think having a drag artist come in and to lead a worship service, it challenges those rules. Do you know what I mean? And it says, you know, those rules that we have about church, how you show up, how you act, how you whatever. Today, forget those rules. We're doing it our own way. We're going to make our own rules. And the way that I organize a service is that I find that it's grounding to keep like a typical, like, you know, opening hymn, call to worship,
Yeah.
reading, that type of thing. It's very much a church service.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we're doing something completely differently today, and we're just gonna lip sync for an hour, you know?
Right.
So yeah, just to like demystify like what exactly drag church is, I think it's helpful to have that grounding.
Yeah.
And then to also incorporate different aspects of queer theology in the service. So I tend to use queer theology in my sermons, queer theology that other people have written, and my own queer theology. And I try to be very good about citing my sources. As far as Joseph, there are a lot of sources out there. I think there's a book called Torah Queries, I want to say. Really good resource on queering that story. Go ahead.
I love that. It wasn't until, you know, I did a little research before we got on, but it wasn't until you said two things. You said, one, you said drag queens, we have something to say about God, which of course, like, I don't like it was just, it's just there. It's like, of course. But then when you talk about like seeing people get it and seeing the people cry and it like, I think of what the haters or the negative people would say is, oh, you know, this is a mockery, is blah, 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 blah. But what I heard and what I saw in my head and what I felt was when someone comes in drag, it just offers another approach, another way for people to connect with God. And so perhaps that stuffy collar, robe, stole, like, if that's the only way you think you can connect with God, but then to see someone come like you with a story that we've heard billions of times, millions of sermons preached, and you're offering me another path to God, then I think of what is the costume that I have worn in church to hide behind? How have I hid in the pew? How and then you come in your bravery, in your boldness, in your fullness of God, in this other way of showing people you can get to God this way too, and you can get to God your way too. And then I can imagine that would just make me like, you know, like just that feeling. So I love that. How do we, as we talk about queering churches, as we talk about revitalization, it's really, the UCC church is really unique, and I love that you were born and raised in the UCC, because even though it has this, there's a stereotype of being progressive, only 38% of UCC churches are open and affirming. So that means the vast majority are not, and of those 38%, people get mad when I say it sometimes because I work for the coalition, but I'm like, those 38% can be problematic at times too. Like,
oh yeah.
So that's, you know, you talk about your experiences. So how do you think when I say we, the church, not just the clergy, the denominational leadership, the congregants, how do we resist that urge to fall into ourselves instead of opening ourselves? Like our name, Open and Affirming Coalition, like Open Affirming Coalition, it's very specific, and those words are very important. But how do you think we become more open to changes, ideas, differences? Yeah.
you just got to take a risk. You know, you just got to do it. And I mean, that's easy for me to say because, like, I have taken the risk. I continue to take the risk. You know,
absolutely.
And I think we also have to. So before I critique the United Church of Christ, I just want to say that I do it with love.
I love whenever you're a part of a system and you love it, you have a right. James Baldwin told me, I love America. Not me, but James Baldwin said, I love America more than any other country. So of course I have the right to criticize her. So it's like, yeah. So I get that.
Yeah. And, people have come for me before being like, why do you come for the United Church of Christ so much? And I'm just like, because like some of this is a lie. Like some of it is like very much a lie. Like, oh, the UCC is open and affirming, and it's like this progressive denomination. But how can that possibly be when, like you said, only 38% of churches have declared themselves to be open and affirming? So it's not, it's just like, I'm sick of people saying that. Like, I'm really sick of people just being like, oh, I'm part of the, and then it becomes this like thing that they could like promote about themselves. Like, I belong to the United Church of Christ, which is a very progressive denomination. And like, okay, sure. And like, don't just talk about it, be about it, And so as far as like, what do we do about that? Well, like we have to live into it. And I think as a people of covenant, part of that is like being in relationship with each other. Right. And we can't say like, oh, I don't want to be in relationship with this person because they're too queer. Their drag is just like too much. Like that is something that I have gotten before. Like, oh, it's great that we celebrate Pride. It's great that we're open and affirming, but drag, I think that's pushing it a little bit too far. And no, it's actually not far enough. So that's that on that. The other thing is that I did not know that the coalition is independently funded. Is that correct? Yeah. So I think that is so. I just found that out today because I was listening to another episode. And, I kind of figured, because I knew that the coalition was independent technically, but to not be funded by the United Church of Christ, and then for the United Church of Christ to use the coalition almost like an accessory to be like, look how great we are. We love gay people. But like, where's the money? That's what I want to know. And, I have said this before. I think that the United Church of Christ should be funding not only the Open and Affirming Coalition, but programs and initiatives to queer the church, to have these conversations in churches. Because when I was leading, my former church through the Open and Affirming process, all I had was an email from someone. I didn't to come in. I didn't have guidance. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And so it was a process of like me figuring this out, going through the emotional labor as like a young queer person, trying to figure myself out and bring my like, almost 300-year-old community here through this process to become welcome. I mean, it's incredibly daunting, and it requires a lot of emotional labor from volunteers. Yeah. And I think the United Church of Christ should do better. I think it should do better, and I think it has to go beyond just a resolution, because resolutions don't really mean anything anymore unless you do something about it. You could pass a resolution and be like, we want to support the Open and Affirming Coalition. Put some money into it. Okay, didn't Jesus say your heart is where your treasure is, or something like that? If we really want to be like the church of today, the church of 2024, then we need to be funding the Open and Affirming Coalition. Y'all should not have to do this independently. I'm so offended at I'm really going off here, but no. Really, it's an abomination to me that the United Church of Christ does not fund the Open and Affirming Coalition. We have to do better. We have to do better.
Can we please get you to take up the offering at our? Because I work for the coalition. Before I worked for the coalition, I was a board member, And the coalition started out of a resolution of a national, of a synod, and I think 85, it was either 85 or 88, I don't remember now. And it started as a resolution. Well, let me take that back. The way that we operate now started as a resolution. Before that, Bill Johnson's ordination in 1972 started the need for the coalition, because there was an openly gay man who couldn't be ordained, and his church said that's messed up. And they were basically the first ONA group at a church that really pushed the conference to ordain him. And the church ordained him. And then they were like, okay, there's more than just Bill Johnson. What about these other clergy people who are being ordained? So people came together, and then the denomination, through a resolution, said, yes, we encourage people to be on this path. And people said, well, let's organize around this resolution and certify churches and do all these types of things. And so, yes, we're independent. We have 2 full-time employees, 1 very, very, very part-time employee, and we shepherd churches through the process. So any church reaches out and says, hey, we're struggling to go through this process, I meet with them. The ED meets with them. If a clergy person calls and says, hey, we're having trouble, and it's a lot. And in all of that, we have to raise money to, and then even in that, I think people think we get money from the denomination. So I'll get like nasty emails from people saying you should be a volunteer. And I'm like, I'm working 60 hours a week. And like, it is. People don't realize that the bulk of the UCC is not ONA. And a lot of people don't realize also that we have to raise our own money. And in the past, the thought was, if we remained independent, when I say in the past, I mean literally like in the 70s and 80s, when the denomination did not want to be open and affirming. If we remain independent, then we aren't beholden to whatever the denomination says. But like you said, now that the denomination is like, oh yeah, we're open and affirming, it would be really helpful to get some of the resources to do the work. So yeah,
I'm not laughing. I'm just like,
no, I get it.
Dumbfounded, honestly. Yeah. And I just found this out 2 hours ago. So
so it's still new.
But yeah, I think, like you said, it's like become this brand for the United Church of Christ. A brand that is not. I mean, 2 full-time people for over 4,000 churches. I mean, come on. We can do better than this. Anyway.
Well, no, thank you. That was, like I said, you have got to be on the committee. What is a blessing, and I'm not saying this because we are independent, what is a blessing is when I talk to other program directors and our ecumenical partners, is we do have more access to, and the denomination helps. It just don't give direct cash support.
Okay.
It's so that it, like when I talk to other, when we have regular meetings with the general minister and president, and resources. And when I tell my colleagues that in other denominations, they're like, "What?" It's like a complete foreign thing. So I'm always like, "Okay, it could be worse, but it could be a whole lot better."
Okay.
A whole lot better. What do you think on those lines, as you're talking about like systems and how even progressive systems can be racist, sexist, homophobic? What do you think? How do you think the church should be operating and moving in this current social political climate that we find ourselves in? We're in an election year. There's lots of anti-LGBTQ rhetoric. There's lots of anti-drag rhetoric, like to the point where, there are a lot of churches that are afraid to do anything drag because they don't want the Proud Boys to show up. Libraries have stopped doing drag story time. Some, places have outlawed public drag if kids will be present. So, like, what do you think our role as a church is? Our role, even as a coalition?
Well, if you ask me, I think that the church should be organizing against the rise of Christian fascism. And I think that like looks different for different churches, and that is my bold, like very idealistic opinion. I also just think that, especially with the like ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people, I think how do I want to phrase this? Like the way that like these horrific things are being unveiled to people, because like they have been going on, right? But in the way that like they are being shown to us, is very horrifying, I think. And I mean, like we literally have to choose between like two old guys who are going to support a genocide. Like, what? That's just not it. And so as far as like, going into like the election year, like, like I have heard people saying like, oh, I'm not going to vote. Like I can't vote. And I hear that, like, how are we supposed to vote between the guy who is basically writing blank checks for Israel to commit atrocities and the guy who says that he's going to continue doing that? Do you know what I mean? Like, what? And like, yeah, that's not the only thing, but like, it's not up to, and like, I will say this, like, as a white person, like, it's not up to me or like any other white person to decide like who gets to live and who doesn't, like that's not my original idea. I heard that on TikTok from a lot of different people. So but I think it's a very good point. Because I hear a lot of people being like, oh, well, like, da-da-da-da-da, and just like, well, I don't know. I think we have found ourselves in this point of like constantly being like, oh, the lesser of two evils, the lesser of two evils. And that's getting real old. It's getting real old. And this is not like, to bring Jesus into it, this is not the kingdom of God that Jesus envisioned. Absolutely not. Not even close. Right. So yeah.
No, wow. I feel you. Like, I'm not a news junkie. I'm a news and political, like, I like to be an informed citizen, and I read a lot, and I listen to, a lot of, I won't say talk radio, not talk radio, public radio. Like, I listen to a lot of NPR and political podcasts and read, and I'm a history major. So I'm all about like what has happened paralleled to what is happening, and it's scary and it's creepy. And I feel like a lot of churches have taken this, oh, we don't want to get into politics because, but I'm like, it's not just like, for me, it's a moral, like, as a Christian, like, what do we think about the commodification of this? What do we think about capitalism as it relates to this? What do we think about bombing children? What do we like, the like, there are all these things. It's like, and isn't that what Jesus did? Like, Jesus was a political figure who stood up and said, this ain't right. Like, so,
yeah. I think the church has gone like so far from like the ministry of Jesus. And I think that we need to go back to, I don't know, like, I'm a huge Bible nerd, so just like flat out say, we need to go back to the gospel and see what's up about
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
You know? But yeah, I think the church has kind of lost its way in terms of adopting this like culture of like apoliticalness and like being a shelter to escape from the rest of the world. Like we need to be engaging with the world, in my opinion.
Get out of our pews, get out of our buildings. Yeah. I get it now. I get drag church. So this is what happens. All right, follow me. You get fabulous and beautiful and 6'2" without heels, and people love drag queens unless you're lame. And then you pull out that awesome Union Theological Seminary brain, the theology queen, and you disarm us with the drag, which you're educating and showing us Jesus and doing it in a way that people are not expecting, because I get it and I love it. I a couple years ago, I wanted to have someone to come in. Our Pride service is bigger at my church than Easter. It's like that's the service that people come to. This year, Trans Day of Visibility was big because it was Easter, and we really pushed Trans Day of Visibility because it was Easter. It's like that to me. That's like the greatest. Like Easter is something that you can really queer, really beautifully, and really and we leaned into that, and it was, well, that was all with the podcast. But anyway, it was awesome. But we did get hate because you start to do that. But when we talk about, oh man, now I'm like, I lost my train of thought. Dang, I forgot. I got segue. We were talking about Easter. Oh, that's what it was. Pride service. And one of my friends who does drag, awesome, beautiful drag queen. And I was like, hey, can you come to church on Easter? I said, I'm not looking to make a spectacle out of you or make you feel embarrassed or anything. I said, if you don't want to actually come do the service, we do like reception afterwards, where we have crafts and cake, and we play games and have fun. And I said, people would love to, if you just like brought your energy and your beauty, and we take pictures with you and eat popcorn, I said, I promise you. And she was so nervous because in her brain, bringing drag to church felt like, is it going to be disrespectful? Are people going to like shun? And I'm like, I promise you, I love you to life. I would never bring you somewhere that you won't be loved, adored, honored, respected. I'm going to be there. There are other people. And, if I know this is a fear, I'll make sure other people, like you need, bring your friends. If you need armor bearers, like whatever you need. And she just couldn't get herself to do it. And a lot of that was because of her upbringing in the church. And so I just thank you for your ministry and for the ministry of so many other people who are doing drag church and doing the things that you are doing, who are really helping people to see all of who they are is beloved and honored by God.
Absolutely. Amen. I think if we are to live into our open and affirming covenants, we can't stop short at drag artists.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say? How can we find you? I see your Theology Queen. If you're listening, theology.queen.com is your website. But how can we find you on socials or anything you have going on that you want us to know about?
So, yes, that is my website, theologyqueen.com. You can also find me on Instagram. I'm most active there for like social media stuff, at Theology Queen. I also do queer theology education on Patreon. So you can find the Glam Theology Hub on my website. It will link you to Patreon. And I'm also available for bookings. If you want to invite a drag queen to church, I'm totally here. Feel free to reach out. Right now I'm in Massachusetts, so if you're in that area, it's probably a little bit easier. Um, and yeah, I guess that's pretty much it.
I'm going to follow you.
Well, I'm also sorry. I just want to say,
No, go ahead.
I'm able, not only just to like show up, but also for guest preaching, to do like drag bingo, to do LGBTQ training, trans 101 training, etc., things like that. So do be in touch.
That is awesome. I'm following you right now on Instagram because that's awesome. And if you don't have to commit to this on camera, but the 18th to the 23rd is our first in-person national gathering in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is where I am located. I'm planning the Open and Affirming Coalition National Gathering, 18th to the 23rd of September. And if you are free, I would love to get you on the program to do something. So just putting that out there. I'll send you more information, but
yeah, definitely. Let's see what we can do.
Shooting my shot, as the young folks say, to get you on there. Thank you so much. This was awesome. Thank you for bringing your full, beautiful, authentic self. Thank you for educating me, for educating us, and for the work in the ministry.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you to you and the awesome work that the coalition is doing. It's really meaningful.
Thank you, and thank you all for listening. Like, share, rate us 5 stars wherever you listen to your podcast. And super excited to be here with Marge Erin Johnson. Take care, everybody, and God bless. Peace.